Imagine crawling into bed in the Middle Ages. No soft mattress, no air conditioning, no playlists to lull you to sleep. Instead, a straw bed, a flickering candle, the smell of smoke and animals, and the constant possibility that the night holds something unexpected. Tonight, we explore how medieval people actually slept, why their sleep might be stranger and maybe healthier than ours, and how these habits shape their lives. You step over the threshold of a small wooden house, the air instantly cool against your skin, carrying the sharp bite of smoke and the earthy musk of straw, animals, and human toil. The uneven floorboards creak and groan under your weight, as though protesting your intrusion. And somewhere in the dark, a mouse scurries, perhaps more startled by you than you are by it. In the corner, a straw mattress lies flattened and uneven, a patchwork of hay that has been pressed and repressed through decades of nights, flattened here, bulging there, as if it had its own moods. You bend over to inspect it. There's no pillow, no goose-down luxury, just a small, rough sack that might serve as a headrest if you manage to balance it correctly. You place it on the mattress with the care of someone defusing a trap, for in the medieval night, missteps are punished by discomfort and sometimes worse. A single candle flickers weakly on a crooked wooden shelf, its flame bending under the influence of the cold draft slipping through gaps in the wall. The wax smells of tallow, a greasy animal-like odor that mingles with the sharp tang of sweat and smoke. You sniff and grimace. This is the perfume of survival, not refinement. You reach for the candle to steady it, and the flame trembles, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. They twist like mischievous spirits, turning ordinary objects into looming, impossible shapes. The crooked chair becomes a skeletal sentry. The bundles of firewood take on the semblance of a crouching wolf. Every shadow seems to hide a secret, and every creak is a potential predator or supernatural mischief maker. You settle down onto the straw, the uneven lumps pressing against your back and shoulders. The cold floor seeps through the fabric of your clothing, reminding you that heat is precious and scarce, and that your body is your only refuge. You tug your tunic tighter around yourself and curl slightly, half sitting, half reclining, in a position designed to preserve warmth. Outside, the wind whines through the chinks in the wall. A constant reminder that the medieval night does not tolerate idleness or carelessness. Then you notice the movement, a flicker at the edge of your vision, too fast to be human. A rat, undoubtedly, emerged from the shadows to inspect the room's new occupant. You try not to breathe too loudly. The little creature scuttles along the floor, sniffing, its tiny claws clattering against the boards, before disappearing under the straw mattress. You exhale slowly, silently hoping it stays there. Not far off, a cat yawns, stretches, and hops onto the mattress, indifferent to the human presence, claiming the warmest corner as its own. You glance down and notice a stray feather brushing your leg, a remnant of some poultry incident earlier in the day, or perhaps tonight's prelude to one. The smells of the day's labor cling stubbornly, cooking fires, smoke, sweat, livestock, and damp straw. This is the perfume of existence in the medieval village. You attempt to lie flat, and immediately you remember the superstition. Lying flat on your back, hands crossed over your chest, is a pose reserved for the dead. No one alive in their right mind sleeps like that here. So you curl slightly, propping yourself with that lumpy sack, knees drawn up, torso slightly twisted, trying to find a position that says, I am alive, I am cautious, I am trying not to freeze to death. Even in sleep, appearances matter. The neighbors could come knocking, the innkeeper might check on the fire, or perhaps a stray dog might choose your bed as its preferred nap spot. And yet, despite all of these hazards, sleep is non-negotiable. You hear a faint scraping from the far corner. Is it the wind? Another rat? The imagination plays tricks on you, filling the gaps between the shadows with figures from stories you've half forgotten. Demons, spirits, wandering souls. Every creak of timber or whisper of wind carries the weight of 1,000 imagined threats. You tug the rough straw closer, burrow slightly, attempting to convince yourself of safety. Safety, in the medieval night, is relative. The candle sputters and threatens to extinguish, and you quickly cup it with your hand, shielding it as the flame shivers and dances back to life. There is a rhythm to this night. The wind sighs, the cat moves, the rats scuttle, the candle flickers, and somewhere, a neighbor's snores punctuate the darkness. You might be alone, but you are also part of a network of human and non-human life that has learned to exist in the shadows. In the silence between gusts of wind and distant snorts of livestock, you notice the faint aroma of cooking fat still lingering in the air. Perhaps it's yesterday's meal, rendered into the fibers of the straw and walls. Or maybe someone in the village is preparing something late. Either way, your stomach rumbles, a reminder that food and warmth were never guaranteed, even after the day's labor. Survival in this world is both physical and mental, and sleep is part of the negotiation. Then the other sleepers make themselves known. You hear the rustle of someone adjusting their position, the low grumble of someone else mumbling in their sleep. Each movement is amplified in the quiet night. You are now acutely aware that the communal bed is more than a place to lie down. It is a shared resource. A battlefield of warmth and elbow room. A place where strangers, relatives, pets, and vermin coexist. You might wake up with a cat on your chest, a chicken under your pillow, and a rat nibbling your toe all before sunrise. And yet, despite all this chaos, people sleep. Because not sleeping is a faster path to death than any rat, cold, or superstition. Outside, the world is no less alive. The wind bends the bare branches against the walls, making them scrape like skeletal fingers. You listen carefully, trying to differentiate between natural and unnatural sounds. In some villages, they say the wind carries voices of the dead, or that wandering spirits can snatch away those who sleep carelessly. You are not sure you believe, but centuries of oral tradition have convinced entire communities that these fears are worth heeding. And so you lie there, half curled, half praying, half listening, completely immersed in the night, trusting your instincts, your senses, and the thin hope that no supernatural entity chooses this room for mischief tonight. Your gaze falls to the ceiling, rough timbers illuminated intermittently by the flickering candle. You imagine the builders, long gone, unaware of how these beams would one day witness countless nights of uneasy slumber. Above, the roof leaks in one corner, letting a small trickle of cold rain slide down onto the floor. You instinctively shift, trying not to disturb the precarious balance of your makeshift bed. You notice the textures of the straw, uneven, poking, prickling, reminding you that comfort in the Middle Ages is an abstract concept. At this moment, you realize that medieval sleep was not passive. It was active, strategic, and communal. You share your space with humans, animals, and insects alike. Your warmth is borrowed from others. Your safety depends on alertness, even in semi-conscious slumber. There is no padded mattress or memory foam to cradle your bones, no soft sheets or earplugs. Just the raw, real living night. A world full of smells, sounds, and textures. You learn to become intimate with discomfort. You learn to let go, and yet remain vigilant. A draft slips through a crack, brushing across your cheek, and you pull the rough blanket higher. Every nerve is alert. You hear the distant crow of a rooster or the first faint bell of a church tower signaling midnight or 1 a.m. You remember the superstition about segmented sleep. The first sleep, the waking interval, the second sleep. People rise to pray, visit neighbors, take care of small chores, or simply sit in contemplative wakefulness before returning to slumber. You imagine yourself among them, quietly navigating the thin line between life and misfortune, comfort and exposure, consciousness and dream. This night is alive with presence, danger, and ritual. The smell of tallow, the grit of straw, the warmth of a stranger's body beside you, the rustle of rats, the occasional snore all blend into a symphony that modern sleepers can scarcely comprehend. You feel the weight of history pressing gently against your ribs, the reality that people lived and slept this way for centuries, enduring cold, pests, superstition, and deprivation. Yet somehow, the human body and mind adapt. Survival dictates improvisation, and improvisation dictates the form of sleep. And so you lie there, half awake, half asleep, aware that the medieval night is both intimate and dangerous. Every sound, smell, and motion teaches you something about resilience and adaptation. You understand in a way that sleep here is not merely a respite, it is a practice, a negotiation with the elements, the household, and the cosmos. You close your eyes and let the night envelop you, feeling the warmth from your neighbor, the occasional thump of a mouse, the shifting of straw beneath you. and the pervasive scent of tallow and earth. In this cocoon of the real, absurd, and unsettling, you understand that this is what it meant to sleep in the Middle Ages. A careful, communal, sensory-rich, chaotic, and surprisingly human experience. You might never find a night more vivid, more alive, or more instructive about the resilience of the human body and spirit. And yet, you drift, suspended in the rhythm of wind, candle, snore, and heartbeat, finally accepting that sleep is not just rest. It is negotiation, adaptation, and, ultimately, survival. As the candle flickers low, its tallow-soaked wick hissing with each puff of wind, you begin to sense the rhythm of the medieval night, the pulse of life that dictates sleep differently than your modern, uninterrupted 8 hours. The first sleep begins with sundown, that moment when the sky turns from deep indigo to black, punctuated by the faintest traces of twilight that linger on the horizon. You lie on your straw mattress, wedged between a stranger's arm and a dog curled up like a furry cannonball, and for a while, you drift. This is the first sleep, a stretch from sundown until roughly midnight, a time when the world outside grows quiet, the animals settle, and even the snoring neighbors seem to find a common rhythm. But this sleep is different from the modern notion of lights out until morning. Here, the body is expected to pause, to stagger its rest. And so, as midnight approaches, your eyes flutter open. The world is not still. Outside, the wind shivers through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying scents of smoke, damp earth, and a hint of whatever livestock has chosen to share its presence with the house. You hear the occasional creak of boards, the shuffle of someone else stirring in the straw, a cat stretching across the floor, and the low hiss of a distant fire. This is not disturbing, it is normative. You are awake because the night demands it, and everyone else is awake too, in one way or another. You swing your legs over the straw and cautiously rise, aware that every sound could be a minor calamity. The floorboards groan, a bucket wobbles somewhere in the corner, perhaps a child has crept into the room in search of warmth, or a parent is checking on a neighbor. This is the window between the first and second sleep, a stretch of wakefulness that can last 1 to 2 hours, where humans engage in activities that today would seem bizarre, or at least highly inconvenient. Some rise to relieve themselves, moving carefully toward a chamber pot or an outhouse, hoping that no wolf or bandit is waiting in the darkness. You nudge past a neighbor's feet, careful not to disturb their slumber, and the smell of the night sweat, tallow, and a whiff of fermented ale hits you with the sharpness of reality. Humor surges into your mind as you imagine saying good evening to the neighbor who is borrowing your bucket, and then hurrying past the imagined menace of the woods beyond. Because, naturally, no one wants a wolf to evaluate their bladder schedule. Others use this time for prayer. The first and second sleeps are not merely physiological. They are spiritual, social, and practical. You might rise in the middle of the night to kneel by a small shrine, murmuring prayers under the dim light of a single candle. Some in your company quietly read from tattered psalters, their whispers blending with the creaking of straw and the occasional grunt from someone adjusting their position. The language of the prayers, Latin, Old English, or vernacular, rises and falls with the rhythm of flickering flames. The night is alive, and sleep is punctuated by mindfulness, reflection, and contemplation. Intimacy, too, occurs in this interlude. Married couples or partners, particularly in crowded living arrangements where privacy is scarce, may quietly share a bed or lean close for warmth. The physical closeness serves both practical and emotional purposes. For you, lying between a stranger and a dog, it is a mental exercise in discretion. You hope no elbows or tails disturb you while simultaneously understanding the human need for connection in a world where survival is fragile. Some take this time for chores. Perhaps the fire needs stoking, or a pot must be checked, or the cat has decided to rearrange the straw in its preferred pattern. This segmented sleep structure allows for practical problem solving in the dark hours, when labor by daylight has ceased. It's a rhythm dictated by necessity as much as by biology. You note the faint smell of wet straw and the iron tang of tools left in the corner. In your mind, you tally the tasks that must be addressed before sunrise. Sweep a few stray straws, rearrange a blanket, make sure the dog hasn't chewed a shoe. The body and mind are never fully at rest, but the rhythm itself has a certain elegance. This pause in slumber, this interlude between first and second sleep, is a socially normative practice. People know that everyone is awake for a time, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. There is a tacit understanding that midnight awakenings are neither unusual nor particularly rude. You might hear someone across the room muttering softly, sharing news, gossip, or observations about the stars, and no one bats an eye. Children, too, may stir, either joining a parent in the warm bundle of straw or sneaking a quiet snack. The night accommodates everyone in all their messiness. Then comes the second sleep. As midnight slides toward the early hours, you notice the return of deep calm. The fire dims, the wind softens, and even the snoring neighbors find a more consistent rhythm. You lie back down on the straw, coiling your body against the draft. The cat stretches, deciding that you are finally acceptable as a human-shaped heat source. Rats have returned to their hiding places, or perhaps found new ones. The world is still, and the body surrenders more fully to the rhythm of darkness. This sleep is more profound, less punctuated, and carries the weight of renewal, the chance to restore energy, if only partially, before the dawn announces another day of labor and unpredictability. Throughout this segmented night, your senses remain alert. Every creak, every sniff, every movement carries significance. You learn to discern between benign noises and potentially threatening ones. The wind rustling leaves, the shifting weight of the straw mattress, the occasional cough from a neighbor, a dog shaking itself awake. You inhale the mixture of smoke, tallow, damp straw, and body odor, allowing it to become the backdrop of your consciousness. The sensory environment is not a distraction, but an intimate partner in this ritual of segmented sleep. In the intervals between sleep, people might also visit neighbors. You quietly pass by the threshold where another family member or an unrelated visitor crosses paths with you. They may nod, whisper, or just gesture silently, acknowledging the shared reality of the night. The social interaction is subtle but necessary. You know that these moments reinforce bonds, regulate the household, and ensure the safety of the community. Each small interaction, each careful movement, is a thread in the fabric of medieval nocturnal life. And yet there is humor hidden in the chaos. Waking up at midnight to go to the privy? Hope it's not a wolf out there, and don't mind the neighbor borrowing your bucket. Adjusting yourself to avoid a stray elbow in the dark? Pray the cat doesn't decide your stomach is a suitable pillow. Listening to someone snore in the pitch-black room, knowing you cannot do anything about it without disturbing the delicate ecosystem of warmth and space, is both maddening and absurd. Every night is an improvisational comedy in which the performers are half awake, half asleep, and entirely committed to surviving the dark hours. You realize that this segmented sleep is a form of communal synchronicity. While you are awake for a time, so are countless others in the village, adjusting, caring for themselves and each other, following a rhythm that balances work, rest, and social cohesion. It is a night where boundaries blur. Strangers share the same bed. Pets act as warmth providers and distraction, and the environment itself is alive with sound and smell. The interlude between sleeps is a microcosm of medieval life, chaotic, dangerous, intimate, and alive. Finally, as the second sleep unfolds, the world seems to fold in around you. The candle burns low, the neighbors are silent or rustling softly, and the distant owl or dog signals the passage of time without urgency. You feel the slow, inevitable surrender of the body, the quieting of the mind, and the gradual descent into a dreamlike state. Your breaths deepen, muscles relax, and the night, with all its peculiarities, becomes a cradle. The segmented sleep, the shared spaces, the scents and sounds, all coalesce into a strangely comforting rhythm, teaching you that rest is not merely a biological necessity, but a social, spiritual, and adaptive practice. You drift deeper, feeling both the weight of history and the absurdity of survival. The warmth of a stranger's body, the occasional misstep of a cat, the rustle of a rat, the cold draft, the uneven straw mattress. You realize, with a quiet smile, that this is what it meant to sleep in the Middle Ages, an experience that demanded attentiveness, humility, and a readiness to adapt, a rhythm that carried humanity through nights without clocks, without electricity, without privacy, yet full of life, community, and resilience. And with that, the first section of your medieval nocturnal journey closes. leaving you poised to observe the day that follows, to understand how this fragmented communal sleep influenced the rhythms of work, worship, and survival. And how, perhaps, modern sleep is richer for understanding the strange, beautiful, and terrifying realities of nights gone by. When you think about medieval sleep, your mind might drift to straw, cold stone, and drafty wooden walls. And you wouldn't be wrong. Beds in this era were far from the cozy, memory foam luxury we take for granted today. For peasants, a bed was usually a pile of straw shoved into a wooden frame or directly onto the floor, sometimes lined with rough linen or wool if the household could afford it. You lie down and immediately feel every ridge, every stray piece of hay poking at your back like tiny, judgmental fingers. There are no plump pillows here, no soft duvets. At best, you have a small sack of feathers or a folded piece of cloth, the humble token of a pillow, awkwardly supporting your neck and catching stray hay poking through. Feather beds were a dream of a world you can barely imagine. Nobles, with their fine linens, heavy drapes, and private quarters, didn't just sleep, they reclined. Their beds were elevated, surrounded by curtains, draped with furs, and scented with herbs to ward off insects and the common stench of unwashed human bodies. They were insulated from the world, a fortress of comfort in the cold, dark night. Meanwhile, outside their chamber, the hallways were drafty, the floors uneven, and the sounds of a living, breathing, village-snoring neighbors. Barking dogs, the occasional squawk from a chicken carried through the wooden beams. But comfort came at a cost. While a noble may have sunk into a feather-stuffed mattress, they were still subject to the whims of the night. Cold air slipping through cracks, servants bustling about, and the faint but persistent odor of tallow and cooking fires. For peasants, those inconveniences were amplified by the sheer practicality of survival. You weren't just sleeping, you were strategizing. You had to get warm, conserve heat, and ensure that the few blankets you had were shared efficiently among everyone in the room. Enter the practice of hot bedding, an ingenious, if slightly uncomfortable, solution. Hot bedding was exactly what it sounds like, sharing your bed with one or more people, and sometimes animals, to conserve warmth during freezing nights. It was a communal approach to surviving the cold, especially in poorly insulated homes where the wind cut through cracks in wooden walls and frost crept across the floorboards. The closer bodies were, the warmer everyone became, and the less likely anyone was to freeze through the night. You find yourself wedged between a stranger's elbow and a dog's tail, feeling the combined heat of human and animal bodies. Occasionally, the cat claims a prime position along your chest, kneading with delicate insistence, while a chicken decides the foot of the bed is the perfect roost. You realize quickly that hygiene was, shall we say, not prioritized. Beds were rarely washed, blankets were sparingly changed, and insects of every kind thrived in the warm, dark, straw-filled environment. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were not only common, they were expected. A slight itch on your arm or ankle was not a cause for panic. It was simply a reminder that you were alive, part of a community, and fully participating in the medieval ecosystem. You shift slightly, trying not to disturb anyone else, but it's futile. The bed creaks, the cat purrs, the dog twitches, and you mutter quietly about the absurdity of trying to find personal space while maintaining your own warmth. Hot bedding also carried its own social rules. Who got to occupy the warmest spot on the bed nearest the hearth or the center where body heat concentrated was sometimes a negotiation, sometimes a lucky draw. Strangers were tolerated, especially travelers seeking shelter for the night, but the room was a hierarchy of proximity. Elders and important guests claimed priority, while those on the edge braced against the draft, feet barely touching the warmth of the group. And yet, despite the lack of privacy, there was a curious intimacy to the experience. Shared warmth forged bonds, even in silence, and survival dictated compromise. This communal sleeping arrangement wasn't just for humans. Animals were recruited strategically. Dogs curled against your legs, not just for companionship but as living heaters, while chickens and cats were tolerated for their added warmth, or at least tolerated until they pecked or scratched at inconvenient moments. You find yourself laughing quietly at the ridiculousness. Think you had a bad night in your bed. Imagine sharing a straw mattress with 3 strangers, a dog, and a very opinionated chicken, all vying for warmth. And yet, somehow, it worked. Bodies huddled together, breaths mingled, and slowly, the night passed. Even positioning mattered. Many people refused to sleep flat on their backs, not only because of superstition that this posture invited death, but also because it was uncomfortable in a bed shared with strangers. Instead, people slept, curled up, propped against walls, or wedged carefully against another person or animal. You learned to contort yourself in ways that would make a yoga instructor proud or horrified, as you try to optimize both warmth and comfort, avoiding elbows, tails, and stray chickens. The smell of the bed was another challenge. Straw, unwashed linen, sweat, and animal scent created an olfactory symphony that might be overwhelming for modern sensibilities. Yet for those accustomed to it, it was the smell of home, security, and survival. Occasionally, someone would toss a handful of herbs into the bedding, a pinch of lavender, mint, or rosemary, to mask odors, and perhaps ward off pests or evil spirits. You inhale deeply, trying to focus on the fragrant hints, while simultaneously stifling a laugh at the reality of human ingenuity in the face of so much discomfort. Temperature control was primitive, but surprisingly effective when used wisely. The practice of layering bedding, combining straw mattresses with wool blankets and shared body heat, could create surprisingly comfortable pockets of warmth. Yet one miscalculation, a draft from a window or a poorly placed foot, and shivers would ripple through the bed like a cold wave, prompting small adjustments, nudges, and whispers of complaint. This nightly choreography of warmth, position, and patience became an unspoken art form, a ritual that demanded attention, empathy, and humor. By the time the night wears on, you begin to appreciate the rhythm. First sleep, wakefulness in the middle of the night. Second sleep, all conducted with a straw mattress, shared body heat, and a deep awareness of the world around you. Hygiene is minimal, privacy is non-existent, but survival, warmth, and human connection dominate. The absurdity of it all, cats claiming your chest, dogs twitching, chickens fussing, becomes endearing, even necessary, because without these interactions, the night might have been unbearable. And humor is never far. You imagine trying to sleep like a modern person in this setting, trying to find a perfect posture on a lumpy straw mattress, insisting on clean sheets, muttering about bed bugs, while your fellow huddled humans and animals simply ignore you and carry on. There is a certain grace in surrendering to the rules of the night, in recognizing that comfort is secondary to warmth, survival, and social cohesion. You smile at the realization that you're not just resting, you're participating in a centuries-old system of shared endurance, creativity, and bodily negotiation. Hot bedding, communal sleep, and the smell of straw and animal fur become the soundtrack and texture of medieval nights. The nighttime is alive, pulsating with breath, snore, shuffle, and occasional squawk. Each movement, each rustle, each whisper is part of the rhythm of survival, an orchestration of the human need to rest while preserving life, warmth, and community. You feel the strange comfort of being crowded, warm, and alive, realizing that this is how humans adapted to the environment before central heating, foam mattresses, and privacy became luxuries. Eventually, as the second sleep deepens, the house quiets. The straw mattress yields just enough. Your shoulders and back find a rhythm with the movements around you. The cat curls softly, and the dog settles in. The neighbors, strangers, and children become indistinct shapes in the darkness, part of the same living, breathing organism that is the medieval household. Fleas and lice remain, odors persist, but in this messy communal chaos, a sense of security emerges. You are warm. You are part of something larger than yourself, and you are allowed, if only for a few hours, to rest. You close your eyes, not expecting comfort, but anticipating survival. The bed is lumpy, the blankets thin, the animals opinionated, but the communal arrangement works. The lessons of the medieval night are clear. Sleep is not a private luxury. It is a collective, adaptive strategy. Sharing space, warmth, and attention is necessary for survival. The body adjusts, the mind relaxes, and the rhythm of first sleep, middle wakefulness, and second sleep carries you through the night, preparing you to face a world without artificial light, modern insulation, or individual beds for every occupant. In this chaotic ballet of heat, breath, movement, and mischief, Humor keeps you sane. You might wake up with a cat on your chest, a chicken under your pillow, and a rat nibbling your toe, all before sunrise. You might inhale a whiff of week-old cheese mixed with smoke, trudge through a puddle on the floor, and still feel the absurd satisfaction of surviving another medieval night. And you know that when dawn finally arrives, the straw mattress, the shared warmth, and the oddly comforting chaos will have prepared you for whatever the day brings. Chores, labor, and another dance of communal existence in the medieval village. As the first light of the second sleep began to dim into the shadows of early night, the household, or what passed for a household in a small medieval village, would often stir in a different way. Not with the hustle of morning chores, nor with the shuffle of children being coaxed into beds, but with a quiet, deliberate ritual. The sacred, slightly absurd, nightly ballet of prayers, charms, and whispered incantations against a host of imagined horrors. You, still nestled in the communal warmth of the straw mattress, might feel a foot press against your back, a nudge of a shoulder, or the twitch of a cat claiming the prime real estate near your chest. Around you, murmurs of devotion rose like soft smoke from a candle, curling lazily toward the low wooden beams, twisting and tangling with the aroma of straw, sweat, and tallow. People in the Middle Ages did not take sleep lightly. You might think that laying down and closing your eyes is sufficient for a night's rest, but in this world, sleep was a carefully negotiated event, fraught with risk. A person could wake in the night and suddenly find themselves caught in the grip of a nightmare, or worse, suspected of being under the influence of spirits, demons, or the devil himself. To prevent such unpleasantries, medieval folk developed a host of strategies that might seem strange or downright comical through the lens of modern sensibilities. Some of these involved prayer, whispered under a heavy wool blanket, hands tightly clasped, eyes squinting at the flicker of a candle. You could hear snippets. "O Saint Cecilia, protect my dreams," or "Blessed Virgin, keep the fiends at bay." And if a neighbor nearby misjudged the timing, you might catch the faint tinkle of a bell, a necessary accompaniment for the devout, trying to ward off evil as their body twisted uncomfortably against the collective warmth of hot bedding. Herbs were equally popular. You might notice small pouches tucked under pillows or dangling from the ceiling beams. Lavender, sage, rue, wormwood, rosemary, all intended to ward off restless spirits, nightmares, or simply the discomfort of an insect-laden mattress. The scent would mingle with the faint, rancid aroma of the tallow candle, the mustiness of old straw, and the occasional whiff of unwashed bodies, creating a cocktail of smells that would either soothe you or at least make you hyper-aware of the life teeming around your body. Some believed that rubbing a little bit of dried herbs on the temples or cheeks could encourage sleep, while a clove of garlic under the pillow might deter evil. You might smile wryly at the thought, "Can't sleep? Don't worry. Just place a garlic clove under your pillow or hope Saint So-and-so is on duty tonight." Stories, too, were a form of nighttime therapy. Before the night stretched too deep, families, neighbors, and sometimes itinerant storytellers would gather close to the hearth, or, in your case, the flickering candle on the edge of a straw bed, and recount tales that walked a line between cautionary and humorous. These stories served multiple purposes. They were entertainment, instruction, and a way to normalize the otherwise terrifying aspects of the night. You might hear the tale of a peasant who fell asleep under a tree and woke to find a fairy circle had spiraled around him, or the account of a baker who dared to steal a loaf from a neighbor only to find his dreams haunted by gnawing, invisible rats. Sometimes these stories were whispered, sometimes chanted rhythmically like a lullaby, and occasionally a neighbor would punctuate the tale with a pointed glance or a nervous laugh, as if to say, "Yes, this could happen, so behave and sleep tight." Superstition permeated everything. People feared that lying flat on their backs invited the dead to visit, that sleeping head down might disorient the soul, or that leaving one's feet uncovered could tempt frost or spirits to creep in. You, squeezed between the legs of a neighbor, a small child, and a dog, with no sense of personal space, would carefully contort yourself into a half-reclining, half-fetal posture, shifting every so often to avoid waking someone or something else. The warmth from the other bodies is comforting, but the knowledge that a stray rat, mouse, or insect could be crawling across your bare ankle keeps you alert. yet oddly alive in the fragile intimacy of shared survival. As the night deepened, some villagers would rise between first and second sleep to perform small, silent rituals. Perhaps they would walk to the privy, a simple hole dug in the corner of the yard, humming softly to keep their courage against imagined beasts lurking in the dark. Others might step outside, peering at the stars and moonlight, filtering through the gaps in the wooden walls, to ensure the house was safe, to check on livestock, or to fetch water. You might hear the faint creak of a floorboard, a whisper of someone muttering a prayer, or the careful shuffle of bare feet across straw and dirt. Every movement, every breath, was part of the nocturnal choreography, balancing the need for warmth, safety, and a return to slumber. And then there was the more intimate side of the midnight vigil. Some couples, married or otherwise, used the first sleep as a quiet interlude for private moments. Candles flickered, shadows danced, and the hush of the night made each whispered conversation, each small gesture, a profoundly private act. You might even hear faint laughter, a soft groan, or the rhythmic creak of bed slats echoing in the otherwise still house. The sense of community remained, yet personal space was respected in its own peculiar, almost instinctive way. Meanwhile, children were not tucked into bed with a story and a lullaby as we imagine today. They slept where they could, often on a small pile of straw next to their parents, siblings, or even the livestock. Their sleep was light, punctuated by the occasional sneeze, cough, or murmur. Yet their presence added another layer of warmth to the room, and sometimes another layer of chaos. The occasional kick, the tiny hands reaching for comfort, or the low animal-like whimper would blend with the ambient sounds of a night alive with life. The wind outside, the scuff of a rat, the distant bray of a donkey or the flap of a chicken wing. It's impossible to overstate the role of imagination in these nights. The medieval mind was primed to see signs, omens, and spirits in every shadow and sound. A swaying beam, the flicker of candlelight, the scratching at the door, or the rustle of straw could be interpreted as a portent. Perhaps the devil is near, or a ghost watches your sleep. Maybe it's only the cat, or maybe it's the neighbor's boots scraping the floor. But every event, every noise, became part of the ritual of sleep, caution, preparation, protection, and reflection. You find yourself tucking the straw tighter, arranging your minimal blanket for maximum coverage, and muttering a quiet plea to Saint Whatever, hoping the unseen forces are pleased with your modest efforts. By now, your senses are overwhelmed but strangely attuned. You can smell the faintly sour tang of sweat and wool, the acrid smoke from the dying candle, the earthy scent of straw, and the subtle hint of herbs tucked under pillows. You can hear the breathing of neighbors, the soft purr of the cat, the occasional groan of the dog, the whisper of wind against the wooden wall. Touch becomes acute. The prick of straw, the warmth radiating from bodies pressed nearby, the chill creeping from the cracks in the floorboards. And through it all, a sense of humor, odd but constant, keeps you anchored. Midnight bathroom break? Hope you don't meet a wolf, and try not to stub your toe on your neighbor's bucket. The night stretches, layered with rituals, fears, and fleeting comforts. Some people rise to pray or meditate. Some whisper softly to each other. Some remain motionless, eyes wide, aware that even a yawn or a sneeze could carry significance. And in this balance of vigilance and surrender, you feel a strange kinship with the medieval sleepers around you. You are simultaneously part of a chaotic community and entirely on your own, negotiating warmth, safety, and peace in a world devoid of electric lights, modern mattresses, or even private space. Eventually, exhaustion takes hold, and you settle deeper into the straw, your body molded to the uneven surface, your mind half alert, half surrendering to sleep. The cat shifts, the dog twitches, the child sighs, and outside, the wind rustles against the walls. And yet, in this controlled chaos, the human spirit adapts, and sleep, however fragmented and communal, finds you. You drift between awareness and slumber, knowing that when you awaken again, it will be either the continuation of second sleep or the start of a day that begins with no alarms, no notifications, and no expectation beyond survival, warmth, and human connection. And if you are lucky, very lucky, You might even catch a few moments of rest where the boundaries between first sleep, second sleep, prayer, superstition, warmth, and body heat blur entirely, where sleep becomes less an act of conscious will and more a shared rhythm. A human adaptation honed over centuries of cold nights, strange habits, and the ever-present comedy of life in the medieval household. You learn quickly that medieval sleep isn't just about where you sleep, it's about how you stack the bones and fold the joints. Posture is a technology in a world without technology, a piece of folk engineering refined by cold floors, lumpy straw, creaking walls, and the subtle politics of a crowded bed. The first lesson arrives with a splinter. There is no universal, blissfully horizontal lying down here. The land itself is at an angle. The bed frame is cockeyed. The straw shifts like a living sea. You become a cartographer of your own body, charting ridges of straw and pockets of warmth, discovering the latitude where a knee can rest beside a stranger's hip without launching an international incident. Start with the half-sit, the medieval classic. You're not fully reclining so much as collapsing politely toward the idea of rest. Your back props against a wall that remembers winters you will never see. Your hips twist to find a ridge less cruel than the others, and your feet tuck in as if apologizing to the night. The wall is both headboard and confidant, a cold, splintery saint that receives the weight of your spine and refuses to move. Your tunic becomes a lumbar roll. Your cloak is a blanket. Your dignity, island, negotiable. In crowded inns and taverns, the upright lean becomes a competitive sport. Travelers with coin grab benches near the fire. The rest learn to sleep sitting, neck at a precarious angle that guarantees you will wake, believing someone tried to unscrew your head. You cross your arms to keep the elbows from jabbing neighbors. You wedge a boot heel against a stool leg to prevent sliding into the ashes. You discover that a mug, inverted and placed under the chin, is the world's worst neck pillow, but a pillow nonetheless. Around you, bodies sway in silent agreement with gravity. The whole room nods like a forest of sleepy willows. On the floor or in the loft, straw becomes architecture. Tufts are not random. They are structural elements. You rake the straw with the edge of your palm to build a berm beneath your shoulder. You pluck a handful to pad a hip bone. You tamp the surface flat, then flip the cloak and hope the lice haven't scheduled a midnight parade. Someone hands you a rolled-up hood as a pillow scratchy, lumpy, miraculously better than nothing. The hood smells of smoke, wool, and the vague democracy of shared sweat. You fold it twice to create a tiny shelf for the skull, then lie down diagonally because straight lines are for cathedrals, not beds. Side sleeping rules the household for both comfort and superstition. The dead lie flat. The living curl like commas. You tuck your knees toward your chest, a punctuation mark in a paragraph of bodies. Facing the wall keeps the draft off your face, but risks splinters on the nose. Facing the room invites a hand, a paw, or a chicken's curious beak. Somewhere in the dark, a grandmother whispers doctrinal advice about which side protects the heart, which side tames nightmares, which side keeps your soul from wandering out the ear. You nod, rotate cautiously, and try not to dislodge the cat currently claiming your ribcage as prime real estate. For the Stoics, there is the plank. Not a true supine posture you wouldn't dare, but a disciplined, near-straight line. Hands not folded over the chest. We remember the funeral pose. Fingers instead threaded into the belt to discourage nocturnal wandering. The plank is the posture of men who must wake for the watch, of women who must rise to mind the hearth, of children who have learned that staying still equals staying warm. The body becomes a bridge across uneven straw. The mind patrols the edges for drafts. When space runs out, and it often does, people sleep stacked, not literally on top of one another, though folklore would nominate at least one winter that tried it, but interleaved, like spoons forged by a distracted blacksmith. Hip to back, knee to calf, shoulder to plank of wall, hand tucked where no one will step on it. In this geometry, consent is choreographed with a nudge and a murmur. You turn, I turn. The bed creaks its approval. The dog relocates with a heavy sigh, and a small avalanche of straw redistributes beneath your pelvis. Medieval intimacy is not candlelit romance. It is the practical grace of synchronized rolling. Head elevation is a doctrine in colder houses. Raise the skull and you trap warmth under the chin. Drop it and you drink drafts like a pilgrim drinks well water. People improvise. A bundle of rags, a folded apron, a saddlebag if you're lucky or traveling. In noble chambers, pillows multiply into a citadel of feathers. But even there, posture remains a negotiation. Drapes breathe with the wind. The canopy gathers dust. The mattress remembers awkward ancestors who slept like saints and woke like sinners. Then there is the monastic compromise. The rule-bound choreography of men and women who turned sleep into liturgy. The bell owns the spine. You lie down with the consciousness of the clock that has no hands. Compline laid you down. Matins will pull you up. The bed is a wooden platform or a simple pallet. The blanket is austerity with edges. You sleep in a position that sacrifices personal comfort to communal rhythm arms, free to fling the blanket aside at the first note. Feet pointed toward boots that must be found in darkness. Mind laid shallow enough to rise in one motion. In this world, posture is obedience, and even the dream life learns to march in time. Medieval neck care would scandalize a modern chiropractor. You learn to wedge a knife sheath behind the skull, tacky, but it works. To knot a belt into a donut for the occipital bone. To hug a bundle of reed mat against the shoulder so the torso doesn't collapse into a pretzel. Someone recommends a pot lid under the pillow to keep out damp. You laugh, then try it, and admit the lid adds a stubborn flatness that rescues the vertebrae from the tyranny of straw dunes. Innovation is less discovery than refusing to suffer in the same way twice. Hands pose ethical dilemmas in crowded rooms. Placed under the cheek, they keep the head from rolling off its little throne. Folded across the belly, they warm the core but risk wandering. Tucked between knees, they anchor posture at the cost of numb fingers. The collective solution is the cloak twine, a simple tie that binds cloak and wrist, ensuring your hand stays on your side of the treaty line. The dog approves. The chicken remains neutral. The feet are political. Exposed, they become winter's playthings. Wrapped, they complicate bathroom expeditions. Many sleep with woolen foot wrappings, not socks exactly, more like affectionate bandages. Some tuck feet beneath a partner's calves, ancient hot water bottles with opinions, while others rest them on a heated stone rescued from the hearth, swaddled in rags to avoid the trademark yelp of too hot, too soon. In the morning, feet tell the story. Soot outlines from midnight fire checks, straw imprints like primitive tattoos, the occasional nibble mark from a mouse with disgraceful boundaries. There is also the guarded curl, a posture designed for the villager who must spring to alertness. You arrange your body as a coil, knees cocked, arms gathered, blade or tool within arm's reach, but harmless to neighbors. A baby lies nested in the crook of a mother's knees, a pattern older than architecture. The curl protects the belly, hides the throat, and keeps thoughts warm. If danger calls wolf, wind, fire, the coil becomes a step. It is not comfortable, it is reliable. In attic, lofts, posture contends with gravity and architecture. Beams command respect. You find the beam-safe angle, the precise incline where a forehead will not rendezvous with oak when the body jerks in dream. You learn to read the slope of thatch as a teacher. This dip means damp, that ridge means wind. This stained seam means not here unless you like seasonal rain in the ear. The loft invites a new posture. The diagonal sprawl, a letter X modified by courtesy, limbs arranged like a compass that politely avoids due north, someone's face, and due south, someone's feet. Sometimes, posture is dictated by injury, pregnancy, or age. The elderly sleep with knees bolstered by stuffed cloth to appease admonishing joints. Expectant mothers practice the careful recline, a choreography of belly and breath, while grandmothers share tales of safe positions, each contradictory, all authoritative. A man with a sprained wrist wears his sling to bed. The sling becomes a tent for the useless hand, which sulks but complies. Children learn the snippet nap postures that seize sleep in slices. Head on table, chin in palms, back against a door, legs out like a barricade. Everywhere, sleep is continuous only in theory. In practice, it is a patchwork quilt, stitched by posture. Hygiene modifies posture more than comfort does. Lice patrol the hairline, so some sleep with scarf tied tight as a treaty between scalp and bedding. Fleas prefer creases. You flatten what you can. Bedbugs despise chaos. You manufacture chaos. Wrinkle the linen, rumple the cloak, Create unpredictable topography so the enemy loses its way. If war is strategy, so is sleep. In noble houses, curtains introduce theater. You pull the heavy cloth and create a climate zone 1 degree warmer, 2 degrees more private. But curtains also steal air. Posture becomes ventilation. You lie where your mouth aligns with a narrow draft that snakes under the fabric. A tiny wind tunnel that keeps dreams oxygenated. Your partner complains you're breathing on the tapestry. You reply it is either that or suffocation. The tapestry, being a tapestry, abstains from comment. Sometimes, the night insists on the watcher's pose. That half-kneel, half-squat you adopt when the wind sounds wrong and the dog's tail thumps a warning. You linger at the threshold between standing and lying, a hinge in the human door. Minutes stretch, the fire pops, the rafters mutter, the outside recites a poem of twigs. Eventually the world relents. You unfold the hinge, ease back into the maternal geometry of straw and limb, and pick up your previous sentence in the language of sleep. And always, humor slinks into posture like a cat into blankets. One elbow insists on learning diplomacy the hard way. A shin discovers the exact location of a chamber pot. You reinvent the medieval yoga sequence. Downward, facing field hand, side, lying scribe, monastic pretzel, sleeping dog, actual dog optional, corpse pose, strictly discouraged. Breath in on the straw is poking my spleen. Breath out on at least my spleen is warm. A neighbor whispers, try putting your boot under your knees, and suddenly your spine achieves detente with the bed. You would thank them, but you're asleep. By dawn, posture has written a small epic across the body. Your neck hums a psalm. Your shoulders carry the minutes. Your hips remember the war. Yet you rise more repaired than broken, because the calculus worked. Warmth exceeded cold, rest outpaced worry, and the choreography held. You shake straw from hair, rub warmth into ankles, and trade field notes with your bedfellows. The wall helped, the stone was too hot. The cat is non-negotiable. Someone vows to renovate the mattress. Someone else vows never again to sleep with their dagger for a pillow. None of these vows will survive the next hard frost. In a world where privacy is rare and furniture is honest, posture becomes a communal wisdom. You inherit positions the way you inherit recipes. A handful of straw here, a fold of cloak there. Stir with patience, season with tolerance, and share generously. You pass down hacks, not heirlooms. You teach the children where the draft lies and show them the good knot for tying a blanket that won't migrate in the night. You learn that comfort is not an accident, but a craft. That a body is not a burden, but a tool. And that sleep, even when it looks like surrender, is very often strategy. And if, in the middle of some bitter January, someone asks you how you slept, you will answer truthfully and with pride. Like a curled fox in a hedge pinched warm and extremely difficult to relocate. Then you'll grin and add because this is how medieval humor survives the night. Try curling into a hay bundle, squeezed between your cousin and a dog, and tell me you slept well. To sleep in the Middle Ages was rarely a private affair. Unless you were among the wealthiest nobles or cloistered in a monastic cell, the act of closing your eyes was not yours alone. It was a collective exercise in warmth, safety, and sometimes awkward intimacy. Sleep was social. To rest meant to share. To share the fire, the bed, the blankets, the air, the stories, and quite often, the fleas. Imagine entering a village cottage at night. The hearth has burned down to a low glow, filling the air with smoke that mixes with the musk of animals stabled close by. In the main room, there is one bed, if bed can be stretched, to cover a heap of straw pressed into a wooden frame. It is not for one person. It is not even for two. It belongs to everyone who needs it. Parents, children, a visiting cousin, perhaps even a neighbor stranded by weather. To slide under the rough wool blanket is to join a human braid, each body woven into the next. Privacy ends at sundown. For the poor, communal sleeping was survival. Cold drafts pressed through walls, floors sweated damp, roofs leaked with the persistence of nature's disinterest. To survive winter nights without fire or furs, bodies became the currency of heat. Children were tucked in the middle like precious embers, parents guarding the outer edges. Elders might be given pride of place near the hearth, their stiff joints soothed by the last tongues of warmth. Even infants slept pressed against siblings, swaddled not only in cloth but in the collective breath of the household. In inns and taverns, the story grew stranger. Imagine staggering into a roadside alehouse after a day's march. You pay the innkeeper a coin, not for a private chamber, but for a place in a bed already half filled with strangers. You may find yourself squeezed between a tanner from the next town and a pilgrim bound for Santiago. You nod politely, exchange a few words, and then lie down, each of you pretending that the other's snores, elbows, and occasional nocturnal movements are part of the furniture. If you are lucky, you might at least claim the wall side, shielded from drafts. If not, brace yourself for the indignity of a stranger's feet edging into your blanket like an invading army. Communal sleeping also served safety. Night was dangerous. Wolves prowled outside. Thieves slipped through unbarred doors. Fire could lick through timber in minutes. A solitary sleeper was vulnerable. A household pressed together was an alarm system. One person stirred, and all woke. A cough, a whisper, a creak of the door. Every sound echoed through the human pile, ensuring that the village's fragile security never depended on one pair of ears alone. In this way, the bed became not just a mattress, but a fortification, a living shield of bodies. And yet, even in this practical necessity, humans found space for ritual. Night was not just endured, it was performed. Families told stories before sleep tales of saints, ghosts, or heroic ancestors. Mothers whispered lullabies to children who were already half asleep, their voices weaving into the creak of rafters. Fathers recited prayers aloud, signaling that angels might join the heap of humans in guarding the night. Sometimes, neighbors lodged together after a feast or a vigil, swapping local gossip in hushed tones before drifting off. The communal bed was also the communal stage, where words mingled with snores and stories folded into dreams. For children, these moments were lessons. To lie awake, pressed between parents or siblings, listening to murmured prayers or whispered tales, was to absorb the rhythms of the household. Every sound became a reassurance. The low voice of a father, the soft chant of a mother, the steady breathing of siblings, the occasional grunt of livestock just beyond the wall. In the absence of toys, screens, or lullabies recorded on Spotify, these sounds were the soundtrack of childhood. They were the proof that you are not alone in the vast dark, that the family's warmth, literal and figurative, wrapped around you. Of course, the communal bed had its absurdities. Imagine being woken at midnight, not by demons or nightmares, but by a stranger nudging you in the ribs and murmuring, "Shift over." Their tone is half apology, half command. You grumble, adjust, and promptly discover that the shift means you've donated half your blanket and 2/3 of your straw cushion. A few moments later, the same stranger sighs happily and wishes you good night, as if they now own half your torso by medieval law. Welcome to hospitality. 14th century style. Travelers reported some of the most bizarre sleeping arrangements. In busy market towns, an inn might be so crowded that people paid simply for floor space, lying down shoulder to shoulder in the great hall. Shoes became pillows, cloaks became blankets, and strangers became bedfellows by necessity. Some accounts describe hot beds. A paying guest slept in a straw mattress until morning, then vacated it for another traveler who climbed into the still warm indentation. In an age without disinfectant, hygiene, or fresh linens, the concept is both practical and horrifying. Yet, curiously, these crowded nights often built bonds. Strangers awoke as acquaintances, having shared warmth, whispered stories, or even fought over blanket territory. The line between bedfellow and friend blurred. To sleep beside someone was to trust them with the unguarded body, a quiet intimacy forged in necessity. Pilgrims bound for shrines sometimes claimed their best friendships were born not on the road, but in the tangled snores and whispered prayers of a shared tavern bed. In noble houses, communal sleeping looked different, but followed the same logic. Great halls filled with servants stretched across pallets, sleeping near one another for both warmth and watchfulness. Even lords and ladies, though separated by curtains or chambers, slept surrounded by attendants who kept fires burning, guarded against intruders, and listened for night sound. The medieval world never truly slept alone. Even in castles, with their thick stone walls, the human instinct to cluster against the dark remained unchanged. There is also a spiritual layer to this social sleep. To share a bed was not simply pragmatic. It was often seen as morally reinforcing. Parents told children that lying together kept away nightmares, that the warmth of siblings guarded against demons. Monks and nuns who slept in dormitories were reminded that proximity to others was a safeguard against temptation and idleness. To sleep communally was to surrender the self into the collective, to dissolve into the larger human whole, where fear was diluted and warmth multiplied. Modern ears may balk at this intimacy, but in the medieval mind, the bed was less about me and more about us. The very fabric of community trust, survival, warmth, was stitched into the act of lying down together. Comfort was not the goal. Continuity was. To wake alive, warm, and still part of the group was victory enough. And so, when you picture medieval sleep, do not imagine a solitary figure under a neat blanket. Imagine instead the symphony of snores, coughs, whispers, and rustles. Imagine the faint smell of smoke and tallow, the press of elbows and knees, the warmth of dogs and children. Imagine the stranger who claims half your pillow and says goodnight as if entitled to it. Imagine the stories, the prayers, the collective exhale that carried a household through the perilous dark. A stranger nudges you in the night and says goodnight like they own half your body. Welcome to medieval hospitality. If you imagine medieval nights as 8 uninterrupted hours of peaceful slumber, think again. Sleep in the Middle Ages was never divorced from work. It was braided into the rhythms of survival dictated by season, necessity, and the unpredictable moods of fire, livestock, and weather. Night was not the pause button of life. It was another stage of the performance, quieter perhaps, but never idle. The fire is the first master of the night. In a cottage, the hearth is both heart and tyrant. Someone must rise to feed it, lest the embers die and the morning greet the household with a cruel frost. You hear the soft rustle of feet across the floor, the scraping of poker against ash, the sigh of wood catching flame. The figure at the fire bends low, hair haloed by sparks, face shadowed with fatigue. This ritual repeats every few hours, a rhythm as important as breathing. The fire is never allowed to die, for a dead hearth means a dead household. Next come the animals. Livestock are not polite enough to wait for sunrise. A cow moans low in the byre. Chickens fuss in their roost. A horse stamps in the stable. In the dead of night, someone, often a child or servant, slips into boots and trudges out into the dark. The air outside is wet, thick with dew or snow, and alive with sounds that blur the line between natural and supernatural. An owl's call that sounds suspiciously like a warning, the rustle of something moving through hedgerows. A lantern flickers, throwing cones of light across mud. You feed the animals, check their bedding, murmur words of comfort more to yourself than to them, and hurry back in before the night decides to notice you. Then there is the grain. In households lucky enough to have a small millstone, grinding could not always wait for daylight. If bread must be baked at dawn, grain is crushed at midnight. Picture a figure bent over the quernstone, hands rough, shoulders aching, the rhythmic scrape and groan of stone on stone filling the night like the heartbeat of the house. Others wake briefly to the sound, sighing, turning, resettling on their straw. It is not considered a disturbance. It is considered life. Season shapes everything. In winter, nights are long and heavy, stretching like wool across the land. Sleep is thicker, broken only by the urgent duties of fire and animals. In summer, night shrinks to a mere interlude, squeezed between endless hours of work in the fields. Men and women rise before the first cockcrow, catching only fragments of sleep, because dawn is not an invitation but a demand. Harvest waits for no dreamer. Hay must be cut, wheat must be gathered, barley must be bound, and every hand is needed. The rhythms of sleep bend to festivals as well. Before great feasts or markets, households might rise in the darkest hours to prepare food or goods. A baker's apprentice kneads dough by candlelight, flour rising like holy smoke around his hands. A brewer stirs ale, the yeast bubbling with the gossip of fermentation. A weaver finishes cloth by lamplight so it can be sold at daybreak. Even while most of the household slumbers, one or two figures toil quietly, their small circle of light in the dark reminding you that night is never truly asleep. And there is prayer. Monks rise at set hours, matins, lauds, vigils, dragging weary bodies from cold pallets to chant in the chill of cloisters. Their voices echo against stone, rising into rafters, meeting one another in harmonies of devotion. To the outside ear, it sounds like strange, beautiful thunder, a chorus in the dark. For villagers, night prayers are less regimented but no less earnest. A mother wakes, whispers a rosary over her child's sleeping form. A farmer stirs and mutters, thanks for the day's safety, petitions for tomorrow's weather. Night is alive with whispered conversations with God, the saints, and sometimes with ancestors whose presence seems nearer in the hours between sleeps. Yet alongside devotion and duty, there is nightlife of another kind. Taverns do not close because the sun has set. They pulse into the small hours, spilling light and laughter into the lanes. Picture the glow of tallow lamps shining through shutter slits, the muffled roar of men arguing about sheep prices or saints' miracles, the occasional crash of a mug, followed by raucous laughter. Outside, the night air carries the sour-sweet scent of ale, the metallic tang of spilled beer, the smoke of a hearth gone slightly wild. Travelers find beds on benches. Drunks stumble into ditches. Fiddlers scrape tunes that no one quite remembers in the morning. The medieval night is not silent. It is rowdy, unpredictable, and punctuated by the human need to squeeze joy from darkness. For the young, especially apprentices and servants, night sometimes offers a sliver of freedom, a stolen hour of gossip by the well, a furtive walk with a sweetheart, a moment to sing or laugh out of earshot of masters. The darkness covers transgressions, and though discovery risks punishment, the temptation of stolen joy outweighs the fear. Even children, told sternly to sleep, may lie awake whispering to one another, inventing stories, sharing fears, plotting tomorrow's mischief. Night is discipline, yes, but also rebellion. You realize that medieval sleep is less an isolated state and more a weaving. Work threads through it. Prayer threads through it. Fear and joy, survival and celebration, all intertwine with slumber. The body sleeps when it can, wakes when it must, and adapts without complaint. The modern obsession with 8 hours uninterrupted would puzzle a medieval villager. For them, rest was flexible, elastic, shaped around the pressing needs of hearth, field, and faith. The sounds of this woven night linger. The scrape of quernstone, the hiss of stoked fire, the murmur of prayers, the giggle of children, the bellow of drunkards, the clatter of mugs, the lowing of cattle. To sleep through it is impossible. To sleep around it is inevitable. Sleep does not resist life. It bends to it. And there is always humor. Imagine rising at 2 a.m., not for a glass of water, not for a midnight snack, but to grind grain, check on the goats, say your prayers, and maybe, if you're lucky, sip a mug of ale. All this before the rooster even remembers his job. By the time dawn breaks, you've already lived half a day. And yet, somehow, you are expected to plow, bake, haul, or pray again. Sleep, work, and nightlife do not take turns. They dance together in the cramped space of the medieval night. You might wake up at 2 a.m. to grind grain, pray, and sip ale, all before the first crow of the rooster. If medieval nights were often marked by silence, superstition, and the steady rhythm of segmented sleep, they were just as often torn apart by chaos. Festivals, feast days, saints' vigils, and market fairs could turn the night into a riot of light, sound, food, and very little rest. To live in the Middle Ages was to accept that your body belonged as much to the rhythms of the church and the village calendar as it did to your need for sleep. You might wake one night to the familiar quiet of prayers and snores, the next to the full-throated roar of fiddles, drums, bells, and drunken choruses echoing into the stars. The medieval calendar was thick with holy days, saints' feasts, Marian festivals, Corpus Christi, Easter vigils, Christmas masses. All demanded attention and often attendance. Villages that were quiet 6 nights a week suddenly exploded into life on the eve of a feast. Bonfires were lit, processions marched with torches, and bells rang until the wooden towers themselves seemed likely to collapse. Children stayed up far past the limits of common sense, running underfoot while adults danced, drank, and prayed. Sometimes in that order, sometimes in reverse. Sleep was not canceled exactly. It was postponed, bargained away in favor of joy, devotion, and the kind of social glue that made a community more than just shared roofs and fences. Imagine the scene. You are lying on your straw mattress, half asleep, when a drumbeat shudders through the walls. Outside, torches flare against the dark, and laughter rings like shattered glass. Someone has decided to parade the relic of a local saint through the streets at midnight. The entire village follows, carrying candles, chanting litanies, and after the prayers conclude, breaking into a full-scale party. Wine flows. Bread is shared. Fiddlers saw away on their instruments until their strings fray. Dancers stomp the earth hard enough to wake the worms. You are caught between sleep and revelry, one foot in the straw, the other in the crowd outside your door. For peasants, festivals were not just spiritual duties, they were the highlight of the year. Work was relentless, and daily life harsh. A saint's day meant reprieve. Markets bursting with food, a chance to eat meat or sweets usually reserved for nobles. A chance to drink enough ale to blur the edges of hardship. It meant hearing music, watching jugglers, perhaps even catching a glimpse of traveling performers, actors, minstrels, or acrobats, who could transform an ordinary night into something close to magic. And all of this came at the expense of sleep. The bonfire was the beating heart of these nights. Flames rose high, sparks swirling into the darkness like mischievous spirits, heat pushing back the cold. Villagers circled the fire, singing and clapping, sometimes leaping across the flames in acts of daring or superstition. Smoke mingled with the sweet scent of roasted meats, the tang of ale, and the pungency of too many unwashed bodies pressed close together. Sleep was unimaginable. Even those who tried to retire early found the noise, light, and smell too insistent. The fire claimed the night, and everyone with it. Children, of course, reveled in the disruption. They chased each other around the fire, sticky with honey or cider, eyes wide with the thrill of being awake when they should not be. For them, the night was not a theft of sleep but a gift of freedom. They learned songs, overheard gossip, and absorbed the rhythms of communal life, all while parents tried to corral them with one hand and sip ale with the other. By the time exhaustion overcame them, children collapsed on benches, in straw piles, or against their parents' legs, sleeping through the din as if trained from birth to adapt. The church played both sponsor and scold in these nocturnal spectacles. Clergy urged villagers to attend vigils, processions, and masses, but they also wagged fingers at the excesses of dancing, drunkenness, and bawdy songs that inevitably followed. Yet the line between sacred and profane blurred easily. Midnight Mass might be followed by merriment. A holy relic might be paraded through streets now, slick with spilled ale. Saints' days were less about restraint and more about release. And while priests preached moderation, they often joined the table themselves once sermons were done. Markets added another layer of disruption. On the eve of a great fair, travelers arrived from miles around, filling inns, barns, and even church porches with bodies. Sleep became a precious commodity, bought with coins for a shared bed or simply abandoned in favor of revelry. Merchants hawked wares by torchlight, shouting over one another, their stalls blazing like islands of fire in the night. Alehouses brimmed until bodies spilled into the street, laughter clashing with the low murmur of haggling. Jugglers tossed torches. Fiddlers dragged crowds into circles of stomping feet. And somewhere in the mess, a chicken escaped its cage, flapping wildly between dancers' legs. Sleep was not so much interrupted as obliterated. And yet, festivals were essential. They were how communities remembered who they were, how they marked time, how they renewed bonds. To forego sleep for a night of celebration was to invest in memory, in stories that would last long after the straw had gone cold. People told these tales for months afterward. Do you remember when old Thomas tried to leap the fire and singed his backside? Or do you recall the minstrel who swore he'd juggle 6 knives and ended up juggling only the apologies? These stories bound the community together, worth far more than a lost night of rest. The sensory memory of these nights lingers in your imagination. The music is relentless. Drums beating, pipes shrilling, fiddles crying, voices overlapping in a cacophony both chaotic and beautiful. The lights dazzle. Torches, candles, bonfires, stars struggling to compete. The smells overwhelm. Roasted pork, spilled ale, smoke, sweat, trampled grass. Even if you close your eyes, you cannot escape. The festival seeps through cracks, through cloth, through your very skin. Sleep is no match for joy, but with joy comes absurdity. Picture yourself finally retreating to bed, only to be woken an hour later by a neighbor falling through your door, clutching a half-eaten pie and demanding to know why you aren't still dancing. Or imagine trying to nap in a hayloft while a troop of drunken carolers mistakes your loft for a stage. Dodging pies and drunken townsfolk while trying to catch a few winks? Standard festival experience. Even the morning after was part of the ritual. The village awoke sluggish, heads pounding, eyes bleary, work slowed, tempers shortened, and yet no one regretted the lost hours. The memory of fire, song, food, and fellowship carried them through the drudgery of the following days. Life was hard, sleep was scarce, but festivals proved that humans could bend even the dark to their will, transforming night from a place of fear into a theater of joy. Ultimately, the disruption of medieval sleep by festivals reveals something fundamental, that rest was never sacred enough to resist the pull of community. To lie awake, to dance, to sing, to eat, to drink, these were not betrayals of the body, but affirmations of the soul. The medieval sleeper learned to surrender rest in exchange for memory, identity, and the warmth of shared celebration. And if you woke with straw in your hair, smoke in your lungs, and only 3 hours of sleep before the rooster crowed, so be it. You were alive, part of the village, part of the story. And that, in the end, was worth more than a perfect night's sleep. Dodging pies and drunken townsfolk while trying to catch a few winks? Standard festival experience. To a medieval sleeper, night was never just physical rest. It was also a theater of the mind and spirit, a space where dreams carried weight, where silence could become prayer, and where every creak of timber or flicker of shadow hinted at powers beyond human control. Sleep was not a neutral state. It was a liminal one, hovering between the earthly and the divine, the mundane and the mystical. Imagine lying on your straw mattress, pressed between family members, half lulled by warmth and half unnerved by the scratching of rats in the thatch. The body aches with fatigue, but the mind refuses to settle. In this in-between space, reflection arrives. You rehearse the day's failures and victories. The loaf that rose too high, the ox that refused to pull, the neighbor whose glance lingered too long. Each memory is a bead, threaded on the string of half-sleep. You turn them, one by one, like rosary beads, asking silently what they mean, what they demand of you, what penance or gratitude they require. For many, this twilight state became prayer. The hours between first and second sleep were ripe for whispered devotion. Kneeling on the floor, clasping hands beneath a guttering candle, villagers muttered pleas to saints and angels, bargaining for health, protection, or good weather. The quiet of the night made these prayers feel closer to heaven, as if the distance between earth and God narrowed when the rest of the world lay still. Monks institutionalized this rhythm, rising for matins or vigils, but even lay people felt the pull. Wake in the night, speak to the divine, then return to bed with the sense that the soul, at least, had worked while the body rested. Dreams added another layer to this spiritual landscape. To us, they are curiosities. To medieval minds, they were messages. A dream of running water might foretell abundance. A dream of fire might warn of conflict. A dream of an animal, a fox, a cow, even a chicken might be taken as divine guidance, ancestral advice, or a hint of demonic trickery. Dream books circulated, cataloging meanings. Teeth falling out meant death. Flying meant temptation. A feast meant fortune. Learned scholars wrote about visions, but so did village-wise women, their interpretations laced with folk wisdom and superstition alike. It is easy to laugh, but imagine waking from a vivid dream in a world where the line between natural and supernatural was blurred daily. A talking cow may sound absurd to us, but to a medieval farmer it could signify a patron saint's blessing, a neighbor's curse, or simply indigestion from last night's suspicious cheese. Either way, the dream demanded attention, retelling, and perhaps even ritual response. You might light a candle, sprinkle holy water, or consult a local wise woman. Dreams were not disposable. They were assignments, and so rituals multiplied. Garlic under the pillow to ward off evil spirits. a sprig of rosemary to encourage peaceful dreams, a cross scratched into the bedpost to keep demons away. Some households muttered charms before sleep, short rhymes binding the dreamer to safety. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Bless the bed that I lie on. Others relied on talismans, amulets hung above the bed, or small relics sewn into pillows. To modern sensibilities, these might seem quaint. To medieval sleepers, they were shields against an invisible army of terrors that prowled the night. Fear played its part, of course. Sleep was vulnerable. To close your eyes was to surrender your body to drafts, vermin, illness, and perhaps to the devil himself. The dark was not empty, but full of wandering souls, of demons seeking hosts, of witches whispering curses. Parents taught children not to sleep flat on their backs, lest spirits mistake them for corpses and claim them. To sleep unblessed, without prayer or charm, was to invite danger. The medieval sleeper defended themselves with every tool available: faith, superstition, and community. Yet sleep was also an opportunity. In an age when literacy was rare and books scarce, dreams became texts of their own. Narratives written by the subconscious, but interpreted as divine. A villager might recount their dream at breakfast, and the household would debate its meaning. Was it a prophecy? Was it punishment? Was it guidance? In a world where the future was uncertain, and the present precarious dreams offered a kind of knowledge otherwise unattainable, they were an oracle available to all, rich and poor alike. The psychological toll of such nights was heavy, but strangely adaptive. Sleep was fragmented, filled with noises, fears, and the press of bodies, but it also became a training ground for resilience. People learned to find calm amid chaos, to weave prayer into wakefulness, to laugh at absurd dreams while still respecting their significance. Humor softened the edges. Dreaming of a talking cow? Don't worry, it's probably divine guidance. Or last night's cheese. Jokes coexisted with reverence, a reminder that survival often requires both faith and laughter. The spiritual practices surrounding sleep reveal how deeply interconnected medieval life was with belief. To wake at midnight and pray was not eccentric, but expected. To carry herbs or charms into bed was common sense. To interpret dreams was to engage with the divine narrative. Sleep was not downtime. It was another mode of participation in the cosmos. The human mind, restless and imaginative, filled the gaps of darkness with stories, signs, and sacred patterns. At its core, the medieval night taught people to live with ambiguity. Was that noise a rat, a thief, or a demon? Was that dream of fire a warning, or just indigestion? Was the child's whimper mere restlessness, or the sign of something darker? Sleep, reflection, and spirituality merged into one. A nightly apprenticeship in humility before mysteries both earthly and divine. And so, as you close your eyes in the medieval night, you are not just resting. You are engaging in ritual, in reflection, in a dialogue with powers unseen. You are lying in straw, but also in a cosmos alive with meaning. Your body curls against the cold, but your soul stretches toward heaven, hoping that prayers, herbs, charms, and perhaps a little humor will carry you safely to dawn. Dreaming of a talking cow? Don't worry. It's probably divine guidance, or last night's cheese. When we finally step out of the medieval night and return to our modern beds, one question lingers. What of those habits has survived, and what have we forgotten? The world of straw mattresses, communal beds, garlic charms, and midnight prayers may feel alien, but its imprint lingers quietly in how we still think about rest, how we manage sleeplessness, and even how we design our daily routines. Take segmented sleep, that curious rhythm of a first sleep and second sleep. For centuries, this pattern was the norm. People expected to wake in the middle of the night, to pray, to work, or simply to sit in thought. Modern science has even suggested that human biology still remembers this rhythm. Many of us naturally wake in the small hours, restless, minds whirring. Today, we call it insomnia. In the Middle Ages, they called it normal. Instead of fighting the wakeful hours, they used them. They mended clothes, whispered to spouses, prayed, wrote, or simply watch the fire crackle. Our ancestors remind us that sleeplessness can be less a curse than an invitation to reflect, to pause, to acknowledge the strange beauty of the night. Then there is communal sleep, a practice that might horrify our modern craving for privacy, but reveals something essential about human survival. To sleep together was not merely a necessity, it was a bonding act. Families, neighbors, and strangers alike huddled for warmth and protection. Trust was not abstract. It was lived out in the press of elbows and the sharing of blankets. In a way, the dormitories of monasteries, the crowded tavern benches, and the straw heaps of cottages were early laboratories of empathy. To share sleep was to share life. And though today we might recoil at the idea of bedding down with strangers, traces of communal rest remain. Hostels where travelers bunk side by side. Hospitals where patients share wards. Even the unspoken solidarity of subway naps where strangers lean against one another, however briefly. The medieval lesson lingers. Sometimes safety and warmth are collective, not solitary. And let us not forget napping culture, which thrived in medieval villages as a supplement to fragmented nights. Long afternoons of summer labor were often punctuated by short rests, snatched in barns, under trees, or against walls. Monks institutionalized naps between vigils. Peasants took them whenever the day allowed. Today, we repackage the same idea as the power nap, a productivity hack for office workers. But its roots run deep into centuries of human practice. To sleep in short bursts, to rest when needed rather than only at prescribed hours, is not a weakness, but an adaptation. Our medieval forebears remind us that rest is flexible, and that flexibility is strength. Beyond rhythms and postures, the medieval night offers lessons in resilience. Consider how they embrace discomfort. Straw that pricked, drafts that bit, fleas that crawled, noises that startled. They learned to bend their bodies into awkward shapes, to use cloaks as pillows, to negotiate space with dogs, cats, and chickens. In all this improvisation lies a profound truth. Comfort is not always guaranteed, but adaptation island. The medieval sleeper teaches us that resilience is not built in silence and softness, but in the ability to endure, adjust, and even laugh at absurdity. There is also a lesson in mindfulness at night. Without electric light, darkness was absolute. Stars and moon dictated visibility. Candles and fires were fragile, expensive, and smoky. To move through the night was to move slowly, deliberately, with awareness. People prayed not only because they were devout, but because the silence demanded it. They whispered stories not only because they were entertaining, but because they sound reassuring. Sleep was framed by rituals that acknowledged the night's strangeness. Contrast this with our modern tendency to flood the dark with screens, to erase the night entirely. Perhaps there is wisdom in remembering that the night is not merely an absence of day, but its own world, full of texture, danger, and reflection. Psychologically, the medieval approach to sleep reminds us that the mind is never idle. Dreams were not dismissed, but interpreted. Wakefulness was not wasted, but sanctified. Even fear was acknowledged and ritualized. Today, we outsource those moments of anxiety to pills, podcasts, or playlists. But the medieval sleeper teaches us that sometimes the answer lies not in banishing the night, but in engaging with it. Through prayer, storytelling, or even humor. Dreaming of a talking cow? Don't worry, it's probably divine guidance. Or last night's cheese. And finally, there is humor itself, the quiet companion of medieval nights. Without it, fleas would be intolerable, cold, unbearable, and communal, snoring a crime. Humor was survival. A wink at a sibling, a whispered joke in the dark, a muttered complaint about a dog's tail in your face. That impulse to laugh at misery is perhaps the greatest inheritance. For what is resilience without laughter? What is adaptation without the ability to smile at absurdity? So, what is the legacy of medieval sleep? It is not just the segmented schedule or the communal beds. It is the reminder that human beings are adaptable creatures, capable of reshaping even the most uncomfortable circumstances into rituals of survival. It is the lesson that sleep is not only a biological necessity, but a social, spiritual, and cultural practice. It is the whisper that perhaps our obsession with perfect 8-hour sleep, private beds, and blackout curtains is only one version of Rest One that forgets the messy, communal, improvisational wisdom of the past. The next time you find yourself nodding off at your desk, curled awkwardly in a hammock, or drifting into a nap on a bus, remember, you are participating in a tradition as old as straw mattresses and monastery bells. Sleep is flexible. It bends to life, and it has always been that way.